At 11:23 a.m. on September 19, 1944, Private First Class Walter Kowalsski crouched inside his M4 Sherman, just south of Erort, France. 3 Panzer IVs were closing fast, 800 yards and closing. His palms were slick with sweat. 2 days ago, the loader before him took a shell through the turret. Nothing left of him but a stain on the steel. Walter was the replacement. A mechanic from Battalion HQ. He had loaded 4 rounds in training. Not one in combat. Not until now. Inside the turret, the chaos was deafening. The gunner was shouting about traverse speed, hands cranking furiously. The commander above was barking coordinates. The driver reversed blind into a hedgerow, branches scraping the hull. And in the middle of it all, Walter had to get the shell into the breech, fast. The ready rack held a 38-pound He round. Walter yanked it free. The proper method, drilled into every loader at Fort Knox, said, nose forward, base aligned, feed the shell head-on into the open breech, slam it home, clear the recoil path. For seconds. 5, if you hesitated. But Walter was left-handed. In the tight belly of a Sherman, that mattered. When he turned to face the breech directly, his elbow smashed into the gunner's arm. The gunner snarled and shoved him away. The shell almost slipped. The commander roared. 600 yards and closing. Walter didn't think. He did something no manual covered. He turned his back to the breech, gripped the shell with his right hand at the base, reached behind himself with his left. Blind, awkward, backwards. His fingers found the breech lip. He guided the shell in by feel, shoved. The breech snapped shut. The cannon fired. Recoil kicked the turret like a mule. Flame and smoke blasted back. It scorched Walter's neck. He didn't flinch. He was already reaching for the next shell. Same motion. Back turned, left hand guiding, right hand ramming. 3 seconds flat. Fire. Load again. 2.5 seconds. Fire. Load. 2 seconds. The commander's voice cracked through the smoke. 4 hits. For kills. The turret fell silent. Out in the field, 400 yards away, 3 Panzer IVs burned. Hulls blackened, turrets split open. The 4th had thrown a track, the crew bailing. Walter stood in the turret, breathing hard, ears ringing, neck blistered from powder burn. His hands were black with smoke and steel dust. The gunner stared at him. The commander climbed down from the cupola and just stared. Nobody loaded a 75 millimeters like that. Backwards. Blind. It broke every procedure in the book. But it worked. And it worked faster than any loader the crew had seen. In that moment, Walter realized something the training schools had never taught. Something the Army hadn't planned for. And over the next 2 weeks, that backwards, left-handed, improvised method would spread from one tank to dozens, and change how the Shermans of 3rd Army fought. The truth was, the M4 Sherman had never been built to duel panzers head-on. Designed in 1941, the Sherman was meant for infantry support, not tank killing. It was cheap to build, easy to maintain, and reliable as hell, but it wasn't a match for the tanks Germany fielded in 1944. The 75 millimeters gun could punch through 3 inches of armor at 500 yards. That was enough to kill a Panzer III. It wasn't enough to crack a Panzer IV frontally. And against Panthers or Tigers, forget it. The shell would bounce off like a pebble. German engineers had figured this out by late 43. By the time Walter's tank rolled into France, every new Panzer had frontal armor thick enough to shrug off a Sherman's best shot, especially at range. The Shermans had numbers. But the Germans had better steel, and they knew it. And yet, somehow, 3 of them were burning now. Because a left-handed loader with no combat experience had done something no one expected. And that was just the beginning. The Sherman's advantage wasn't its armor or its gun. It was speed, mobility, numbers. American doctrine didn't pretend the M4 could match German panzers one-on-one. The theory was, 5 Shermans could swarm a single panzer. Maneuver. Flank. Hit from the sides. The math worked on paper. In practice, it meant 4 out of 5 crews died trying to get into position. Tankers had a name for it, the death ratio. For every German tank destroyed in the summer of 1944, Allied forces lost 4 Shermans. Sometimes 5. At Villers-Bocage, 1 Tiger tank wiped out 25 British tanks in 15 minutes. At Goodwood, July, the British lost 200 Shermans in a single day. Burned-out wrecks lined the hedgerows of Normandy like tombstones. Every crew in France had seen it. They'd dragged charred bodies from turret hatches. They'd listened to the screams of men cooking alive when a round set off the ammunition rack. A direct hit to the turret usually killed the loader first. He sat next to the ready rack, where 20 live shells waited. If those cooked off, there wasn't much left to bury. American commanders tried everything to even the odds. Crews stacked sandbags on the glacis. They welded spare track links to the turret for extra armor. Some painted fake command markings on their hulls, hoping to draw fire away from real command tanks. Nothing helped much. A Sherman still couldn't punch through a Panzer's front plate. And in a gunfight, the tank that fired first usually won. That made speed everything. Rate of fire wasn't a luxury, it was survival. The standard time to load the Sherman's 75mm gun was 4 to 5 seconds. That was the doctrine. Shell from the rack, rotate, align, ram it into the breach, clear the path. The gunner fired. Repeat. Panzer IV crews could match that speed. Panther crews were a second slower. Their shells were heavier, but the Panther didn't need speed. Its 75mm high-velocity gun could kill a Sherman at 2,000 yards. A Sherman needed to get within 500 just to have a chance. At Fort Knox, they drilled loading procedures endlessly. Safe, repeatable, efficient. Loaders practiced until the motion was muscle memory. Face the breach. 2 hands on the shell. Right hand leads. Ram it home. But there was one thing they didn't consider. What happened when the loader was left-handed? Walter Kowalsski was left-handed. So were 3,000 other loaders in 3rd Army, though nobody tracked that number officially. Because at Fort Knox, it didn't matter. You learned to do it right-handed, or you failed. That was the rule. No exceptions. In a classroom, it worked. In a motionless tank, it worked. On a battlefield, in a moving Sherman, under fire, it killed people. The inside of a Sherman turret was barely 7 feet across. Cramped, hot, loud. The loader stood to the right of the gun. The gunner sat to the left. The commander loomed above and behind. When the cannon fired, it recoiled nearly 2 feet. When the turret moved, it jerked everything inside with it. Space was tight. Movement had to be perfect. Right-handed loaders could work the shell from the rack smoothly. Pivot. Align. Ram. Their right arm tracked naturally with the breech. The motion was clean. Efficient. Fast. Left-handed loaders struggled. They had to lead with their weaker hand. Their strong hand supported from behind. And when they turned, their left elbow flared out, right into the gunner, or the radio box, or the turret wall. Every time, it slowed them down. For seconds became 5. 5 became 6. In training, they were told that was fine. Acceptable variance. In combat, those seconds got people killed. At Erort, mid-September 1944, 4th Armored lost 18 Shermans in the first 48 hours. Most were hit before they got a 3rd shot off. Some never got off a single round. After-action reports tell the story. Loaders fumbled shells. The breech jammed. Some reports mentioned left-handed loaders explicitly. One tank commander wrote, "Loader dropped the 2nd shell mid-combat. Delay was 8 seconds. Panzer hit us before we fired again. Loader Kia. Gunner critical." The problem wasn't just handedness. It was the system, the assumption that one method worked for all men, in all tanks, in all battles. And that assumption was bleeding crews dry. But nobody changed the training. Because doctrine was doctrine. Until Walter Kowalsski, in a burning field near Erort, turned his back to the breech and loaded a 75mm shell backwards, and proved them all wrong. Even right-handed loaders struggled when the tank was moving. The M4 Sherman had no stabilizer worth the name. No gyroscopic gun control, no automated targeting system. When it rolled over uneven terrain, the whole turret shook. The breech shifted with every jolt. Loaders had to time their movement, wait for the sway, then slam the shell home, like threading a needle during an earthquake. The training manual didn't cover this. Trying to ram a 38-pound shell into a moving breech while standing in a swaying, vibrating turret under incoming fire took more than strength. It took rhythm, nerve, instinct. Most loaders gripped the breech rim with one hand to steady themselves and used the other to guide the shell. It worked mostly, but it meant loading one-handed. That slowed things down. It also increased the chance of a dropped shell, the one mistake no loader could afford. When a shell slipped, it took 10, maybe 15 seconds to recover. That was enough. A panzer needed 5 seconds to fire again. Less, if their gunner was good. Commanders knew it. They watched their loaders fumble through it. They watched good men get torn apart because a shell hit the floor instead of the breech. Some tried to help, giving earlier firing coordinates, angling the tank for more room to work. But there was no fix. The manual said what it said. Face the breech, 2 hands on the shell, right hand leads. That was doctrine. Changing it meant breaking regulation. What nobody realized was that the solution already existed. It just meant breaking every rule in the book. Walter Kowalsski found it by accident. By desperation. 2 days before the fight that would make him famous, on September 17, 1944, his Sherman took a glancing hit near Ratch. A panzer shell struck the glassy plate at an angle and ricocheted upward. It didn't penetrate, but the impact knocked Walter sideways, hard, against the turret wall. His right shoulder popped out of its socket with a sound he still remembered decades later. The medic popped it back in. Said he was done. Useless. A loader with a bad shoulder couldn't function. You needed 2 working arms, perfectly synchronized, to load a Sherman's 75mm cannon. But 4th Armored Division was running low on men. They'd lost 36 loaders in the past week. No replacements. No reserves. Sergeant Raymond Miller, the tank commander, made a call. He told Walter to stay in the tank. "We'll figure something out," he said. And Walter didn't argue. The next morning, September 18th, fog blanketed the low fields east of Error. They were already moving when the radio call came through. German armor ahead. At 900 yards, the first muzzle flashes lit up the mist. 3 Panzer IVs. Miller shouted fire orders. The gunner tracked the lead tank. Walter reached for the first round with his good arm, his left. His right arm just hung there, useless. He tried the standard load. Face the breech, grip with both hands, rotate and ram. His shoulder exploded in pain. The shell tipped. Started to slip. He caught it. Barely. The gunner was shouting. "Hurry up." The panzers were closing. 800 yards. Then 700. Walter made a choice. Panic. Instinct. Innovation. He turned his back to the breech. He reached behind himself with his left hand, shell balanced awkwardly in his grip, groping for the chamber like a blind man reaching for a latch. His fingers found the breech rim, hot, greasy, vibrating. He angled the shell backward and slammed it home. One arm. Wrong direction. Completely against training. The breech clicked shut. The gun fired. The recoil blast hit Walter square in the back, the heat searing through his jacket. Burned fabric. Burned skin. He didn't care. He was already reaching for the next round. Same motion. Back turned. One-handed. Load. Fire. 3 seconds. Next round. Same again. Fire. The panzers were firing now. Shells screamed over the turret like ripping metal. Walter didn't stop. 4th round. 5th. His left arm screamed. Muscles tearing under the strain. Sweat soaked through his shirt. The ready rack was half empty now. 9 shells in 4 minutes. 2 direct hits. 1 panzer burned out. The second had a split hull and no turret. The third retreated. When the engagement ended, nobody said a word. The gunner stared at Walter. Sergeant Miller climbed halfway down into the turret, took one look at the loader, then at the burnt back of his uniform. "You just load backwards?" he asked. Walter nodded. And in that moment, he'd done something no instructor at Fort Knox had ever imagined. He'd rewritten the rules. The 3rd Panzer disappeared behind a tree line, trailing smoke from a lucky near hit. When the shooting stopped, the only sound in the Sherman was the low hiss of the ventilation fan. Walter slumped against the turret wall, breath ragged, uniform soaked through. His back was black with powder burns. His left arm shook uncontrollably from effort. His right still hung limp at his side. Sergeant Miller climbed down from the hatch and stared at him. So did the gunner. For a long moment, no one said a word. Then Miller asked a simple question. How fast was that? Walter didn't know. He hadn't been counting. The gunner had. 3 seconds, he said. Sometimes less. That was faster than their last loader. Faster than anyone in their platoon. Maybe faster than anyone in the battalion. Miller didn't hesitate. Whatever you just did, keep doing it. And that was it. The moment it became real. The moment improvisation became doctrine, at least for one crew, in one tank, outside a village in France. Even if it violated every line of the field manual. What Walter had done, what he would come to call the reverse load, Worked for 3 reasons no instructor at Fort Knox had ever considered: leverage, space, and instinct. Leverage first. The standard method told loaders to face the breech, grip the 75mm round with both hands, and shove it forward. That meant pushing 38 pounds of steel with fully extended arms. Every mechanic knows that's the weakest position you can be in, like trying to drive a nail by tapping it with the tip of your finger. The strength isn't there. Walter's method flipped the geometry. By turning his back to the breech, he reversed the force. He wasn't pushing the shell forward, he was driving it backward. Bent arm. Short distance. His body behind the motion. It was like throwing a backward punch into the chamber. Tight, explosive, efficient. Instead of pushing with triceps, he loaded with his shoulder, his back, and the core of his body. Instead of 24 inches of reach, he needed only 12. Less motion. More power. Faster loading. Then there was space. Shermans weren't roomy. A full combat load meant 4 men packed into a steel drum, every inch used. Facing the breech took up room, 2 feet of lateral space. Arms out, elbows wide, shoulders square to the gun. In that position, loaders constantly bumped into the gunner, into the commander above, into the elevation mechanism behind. Every collision cost time. Sometimes it cost the shell. Walter's reverse method streamlined the entire process. With his back turned, his shoulders aligned with the gun, not against it. He became part of the turret layout. His profile shrank to 10 inches, maybe less. Suddenly the gunner had elbow room. The commander could lean down without cracking helmets. Everything inside moved smoother. Faster. Cleaner. Nobody got in anybody's way. But the most important part was instinct. The standard doctrine assumed right-handed dominance. Loaders were trained to lead with their right hand, twist to the breech, and fire. But that motion, twist left, load right, was awkward even for right-handed men. It required coordination, precision. In combat, when adrenaline drowned out muscle control, that coordination broke down. Loaders fumbled shells, dropped them, hesitated. Left-handed loaders had it worse. They were forced to lead with their weak side. It wasn't just inefficient, it was dangerous. They were set up to fail. Walter's method killed the problem. He loaded with his dominant hand, his only functioning arm. He didn't think about the motion. He didn't have to. The movement was natural, blind even. When the shell came up, his hand already knew where the breech was. Knew the angle. Knew the pressure. He didn't need to see. He could feel it. Under fire, that kind of motion saved lives. And it wasn't just a left-handed trick. Right-handed loaders could use the same motion in reverse. Back turned, dominant hand leading, natural movement. The only requirement was trusting instinct over training. But there was a problem. A big one. It was illegal. According to Army regulations, specifically Technical Manual 9-731A, the official guide to Sherman tank gunnery, Walter had broken every rule in the book. Regulations stated, loaders would face the breech at all times. Loaders would maintain visual contact with the shell and breech throughout the motion. Loaders would use both hands in synchronized, forward motion. Walter had done none of that. He couldn't see the breech. He used one hand. He loaded backward. And worst of all, it worked. It worked better. But he couldn't teach it. Couldn't show it. Couldn't speak about it outside his crew without risking formal reprimand. Or worse, court-martial. And yet, after that day, Sergeant Miller made sure every loader in their platoon knew exactly what Walter had done. Word started to spread. Quietly. Tank by tank. Shell by shell. They were supposed to step clear of the recoil path after every load. That was regulation. The 75mm cannon recoiled 18 inches with every shot. A loader who stood too close could be crushed, burned, or thrown across the turret. The manual was unambiguous. Face the breech. Keep eyes on the shell. Use both hands. Step away after loading. Walter's method violated all 4 rules at once. He couldn't see the breech. He used one hand. He turned his back. He stayed in the recoil zone. And yet, it worked. The Army's reasons were valid. A loader who couldn't see the breech might misalign the shell. A misaligned shell could jam the mechanism. A jam in combat didn't just stop a gun, it killed a crew. The manual cited 3 separate incidents from North Africa. In one case, the gun jammed under fire, and the Panzer didn't miss its second shot. Everyone inside died. Sergeant Raymond Miller knew all of that. He also knew Walter had loaded 9 shells in 4 minutes, landed 4 direct hits, and lived to tell about it. After the fight on September 18th, Miller faced a choice: report Walter's violation and lose the fastest loader in the battalion, or stay quiet. He chose survival. On September 19th, the day that opened this story, Walter's crew destroyed 4 Panzers in 6 minutes. The kills were clean. Center mass. All before the Germans got off a third shot. Other tank commanders noticed. When your battalion is losing 2 Shermans for every Panzer, you don't ignore a crew that flips the ratio. By September 20th, 3 other loaders were trying Walter's method. By the 21st, it was 8. Nobody asked permission. They just turned their backs to the breach and started surviving. It spread like fire through the division. Not in official orders, not in memos, but in quiet conversations behind motor pools. In whispered instructions between tanks parked for maintenance. In live fire drills where somebody said, "Hey, try this." The results were impossible to ignore. Loaders using the reverse method were cutting reload times to under 3 seconds. They were firing 9 to 10 rounds per engagement instead of 6 or 7. They were getting the first killing shot off before the Panzer could even react. Crew survival rate spiked. The battalion's kill ratio, once 4-1 against them, began to shift toward even. But still, no one wrote it down. No one dared suggest it officially. It was off-book, dangerous, an open violation of Army field doctrine. Then Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams found out. He commanded the 37th Tank Battalion, a name that would one day command the entire United States Army. But in September 1944, he was just a young, aggressive battalion commander trying to keep his men alive. On September 23rd, Abrams was observing a live fire training near Error when he saw it. A loader, back turned, single motion, one arm, slammed a shell into the breach in 2.8 seconds. Abrams halted the exercise on the spot. He ordered the crew out of the tank, demanded an explanation. Sergeant Miller stepped forward. He told Abrams everything: about Walter, about the burns, about the rate of fire, about the survival numbers. Abrams didn't speak. He stood there in full silence while every man within earshot held their breath. Then he asked one question: "Does it work better than the manual?" Miller didn't blink. "Yes, sir. 2 seconds faster per round. Fewer dropped shells. More accurate fire under pressure. Less interference inside the turret." Abrams was quiet for 30 seconds. Tank crews had seen men reprimanded for less. Some expected Miller to be pulled off the line, maybe Walter too. Instead, Abrams nodded, then said 6 words: "Teach it to every loader here." That moment changed everything. From that point forward, Abrams made it standard. If turning your back to the breach meant your crew survived, that was the new doctrine. No paperwork, no authorization, just results. Within 48 hours, the 37th Tank Battalion began retraining every loader. Walter was brought in personally. He stood beside tanks in the dirt and showed the motion, step by step. Slow at first, then full speed. Veteran loaders watched, practiced, matched his time, beat it. The change was seismic. By October 1st, nearly 90% of all loaders in 37th Battalion were using the backward method in combat. And by October 10th, so were the crews in the 35th, then the 4th, then the 6th. What started as desperation had become silent revolution, an unofficial change to tank doctrine, passed from soldier to soldier, one shell at a time. And Walter Kowalsski, the left-handed mechanic who was never supposed to be in a loader's seat, became the man who rewrote the manual without ever touching a typewriter. The results weren't theoretical anymore. They were happening in real time. Average engagement times for Abrams' battalion dropped from 12 minutes to 8. Crews were getting the first shot off, and the second and third, before the enemy had time to respond. Their kill ratio improved to better than 1-to-1, unheard of in Sherman units up to that point. They were losing fewer tanks, destroying more Panzers, and, most importantly, coming home alive. Other battalion commanders in 4th Armored Division started to notice. They began asking Abrams the same question: "What are you doing differently?" Abrams told them. Some adopted the technique immediately. Others refused. The manual was the manual. Regulations were regulations. Changing procedures without authorization from Corps Command was technically insubordination, punishable by discipline, even court-martial. But 3rd Army had a different kind of commander. General George S. Patton didn't care much for manuals. He cared about speed and results. When staff officers showed him the after-action reports from 4th Armored, the sudden improvement in kill ratios, the survival rates, the increased volume of fire, Patton asked one question. Why the hell isn't every crew doing this? On October 7, 1944, Patton personally visited 4th Armored Division HQ. He didn't read a report. He didn't sit in a meeting. He went straight to a Sherman tank and watched Walter Kowalsski demonstrate the backward loading technique. Walter did it under pressure, with officers watching from every angle. 3, 0 seconds. Then 2, 8, then 2, 9. Patton stood there with his stopwatch in hand, nodding. Then he turned to his chief of staff and said one sentence that changed everything. From now on, every tank in 3rd Army loads like this. No more whispers behind the motor pool. No more secret demos between loaders. It was now policy. Any battalion commander who refused would be relieved of command. Any officer who tried to punish a loader for using Walter's method would answer to Patton personally. 3rd Army had 11 armored divisions, nearly 4,000 Sherman tanks in the European theater. Within 2 weeks, the backward loading method was standard practice across them all. Training officers ran formal drills. Replacement crews learned the technique on their first day. Veteran loaders taught the rhythm, the angle, the grip. What had once been desperation in a turret near error was now doctrine in Patton's army. The numbers followed. Between October and December 1944, 3rd Army's tank kill ratio improved from 3:1 against them to 1:1. Sherman crews were engaging faster, firing more accurately, and surviving longer. Crew survival increased by 18%. That was thousands of lives. Thousands of families not getting telegrams. Thousands of tankers going home. The change didn't go unnoticed. By January 1945, loaders in 1st Army and 9th Army were turning their backs to the breach. By March, the technique had crossed oceans. Sherman crews in Okinawa were using the same motion Walter had invented by accident with a dislocated shoulder in France. The Army never updated Technical Manual 9-731A. It still said loaders should face the breach, use both hands, maintain eye contact with the shell. But the soldiers didn't care. They knew better. The manual was theory. The backward method was survival. By the time the war ended in May 1945, tens of thousands of Sherman loaders had used Walter's method. Nobody knows exactly how many lives it saved, but the casualty statistics suggest it was more than a few. What happened to Walter Kowalsski tells you everything about how the Army handles innovation. He received no medal, no commendation, no formal recognition. The Army doesn't decorate soldiers for violating regulations, even if those violations save lives. What he did receive was a promotion. On October 15th, Sergeant Miller submitted a recommendation. Promote Private First Class Walter Kowalsski to Corporal immediately. The paperwork cleared in 72 hours. Walter didn't ask for it. He never even knew it was coming. He spent the rest of the war as a tank loader in the 37th Tank Battalion. He fought in 14 more engagements. His tank was hit 3 times. He walked away every time. His crew destroyed 23 German tanks between September 1944 and May 1945. Walter loaded every single round. Backward. Every time. By the war's end, he could load a 75mm shell in 2.3 seconds, blindfolded. His arms moved from memory. His hands knew the motion before his brain even issued the order. He never called it genius. Never called it courage. When a historian asked him later how he figured it out, Walter just said, "My right arm was busted. I didn't have a choice." After the war, Walter Kowalsski came home quietly, like so many others. He returned to Detroit, took back his old job as a mechanic at the Ford River Rouge plant. He married in 1947, raised 3 children, and worked 41 years on the line before retiring in 1986. He never spoke much about the war. Most veterans didn't. But the technique he invented in a burning turret outside Erich kept saving lives long after he came home. During the Korean War, American tank crews once again faced close-range armor combat, this time against North Korean T-34s. They brought Shermans. Modified, yes, but familiar. And the loaders? They were trained in the backward method. At Fort Knox, instructors taught it by name now. Kowalski's technique. Combat reports from the 1st Marine Division around the Pusan perimeter highlighted one clear advantage: loader speed. Sherman crews trained in the backward method averaged 2.8-second load times. North Korean loaders took 4 seconds. 1.2 seconds was the difference between survival and a direct hit, between one more round downrange or a funeral with an empty casket. In Vietnam, the last combat Shermans served with the South Vietnamese Army. By then, they were outdated, outgunned, outarmored, but the loading principles still worked. Crews operating M48 Patton tanks, with their heavier 90mm guns, adapted Walter's technique to fit the bigger shells. Same motion, same leverage, same physics. Turn your back, feel the breach, ram the shell, fire. The steel changed, the war changed, but the human element remained. Even after automatic loaders arrived in the 1970s, Walter's technique didn't vanish. Not entirely. The M1 Abrams has a semi-automatic loading system, but humans still handle the rounds before they enter the breach. At Fort Benning, until the late 1980s, training NCOs who'd fought in Vietnam still taught variations of Walter's method: modified grips, body positioning, backward ramming. They didn't always use his name, but the motion was the same. The motion that saved his crew in 1944. In 1993, a military historian researching 4th Armored Division tactics came across scattered references to a reverse loading method buried in after-action reports. He dug deeper, found citations, numbers, anecdotes, no names. Then he found Walter, through a veteran registry, still living in Michigan, retired, quiet. The historian asked him if the story was true, if he'd really turned his back to a 75mm gun in the middle of combat. Repeatedly. Walter nodded, said it wasn't anything special. I couldn't use my right arm. That's all. I figured something out. The historian wrote a paper. He called it one of the most important frontline tactical innovations of World War II. Estimated that the technique had helped save between 300 and 500 American tank crew lives in Europe alone, from October 1944 to May 1945. That didn't count Korea or Vietnam or the generations of training that followed. Walter Kowalsski died in 2004, age 82, at home, peacefully. His children buried him in Resurrection Cemetery, Clinton Township, Michigan. His obituary was short. It mentioned the war, said he served honorably, said he worked for Ford, said he was a father and grandfather. It did not say that he had changed how American tanks fought, did not say that his motion saved hundreds of men, did not say he had rewritten a piece of battlefield history with a broken arm and a desperate idea. 3 of his children attended the funeral. So did 7 other men. All were veterans. All were former tank loaders. One of them brought a shell casing. Another brought a rusted, old training mirror. None of them wore their uniforms. But each of them, quietly, knew the story. One leaned in as the casket was lowered and said, "Thanks, Corporal. You made it home. So did we." They had never met Walter Kowalsski before that day. Not in France. Not in training. Not in war. But they came to his funeral because they understood what he had given them. Each had learned the backward loading method from men who learned it from others. A chain of memory stretching back to a foggy battlefield near Error in September 1944. A technique passed from crew to crew, loader to loader, tank to tank. No medals. No manuals. Just survival. The backward method remained standard practice for American tank loaders through the Korean War, into Vietnam, and even into the 1970s, as crews operated M48 and M60 Patton tanks. The last to use it were the early M1 Abrams crews, even though their tanks featured semi-automatic systems. Their instructors still taught a modified version of Walter's method, not because doctrine required it, but because it worked. Until automation replaced muscle, Walter's idea kept soldiers alive. Today, if you visit the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, you can find Walter Kowalski's service record. It lists his rank, his unit, his dates of service. Nothing more. It says nothing about what he did in that turret, nothing about what he discovered, nothing about what it changed. But if you request the after-action reports from 4th Armored Division, September to October 1944, you'll see the traces. Improved loading efficiency. Reduced engagement times. Increased crew survivability. No explanation. Just the results. The cause was never written down. At the Patton Museum in Fort Knox, Kentucky, there's a restored M4 Sherman on display. The inside is preserved exactly as it was in 1944. No electronics. No air conditioning. Just metal, bolts, sweat, and smoke. If you step into the loader's position, right side of the turret, you immediately understand why Walter turned his back to the breach. There simply isn't room to do it any other way. The placard beside the tank lists the Sherman specs: armor thickness, gun caliber, engine horsepower. It includes a single line: American tank crews developed innovative tactics to overcome disadvantages against German armor. It does not mention Walter Kowalsski. It does not mention the backward loading method. It does not mention that sometimes the most important innovations in war come from scared 20-year-old mechanics trying not to die. That's how wars are won. Not by generals. Not by strategy. Not by equipment alone. But by ordinary people making split-second decisions under fire. By mechanics who figure out better ways to load a shell. By soldiers who break the rules because the rules don't work anymore. Walter Kowalsski never called himself a hero. Never asked for recognition. Never wrote a letter. Never asked to be remembered. He was just a left-handed kid from Detroit. In a tank he wasn't trained to fight in. With an arm he couldn't use. Who found another way. It saved his crew. It saved his battalion. Maybe it saved hundreds of others. And like so many battlefield innovations, it disappeared into the silence after the guns stopped. But now you know.